Welcome to our first conversation. Welcome back on the AM show. We get into our big stories and the tail of the tape on the back of the domestic debt exchange program. The central bank, the Bank of Ghana, lost upwards of 32.3 billion Ghana cedis. The question is, with the central bank taking that haircut to its principal, was it being used as a sort of guinea pig, scapegoat in this scenario? Of course, the Bank of Ghana has posted its losses on the back of the DDEP, which has also ballooned our debt situation. But has the Bank of Ghana been treated fairly? What are the underlying dynamics? And what should we be looking forward to in future in terms of responsibility moving forward? The Bank of Ghana, the central bank itself, per Dr. Ernest Addison, has its own moves, proposals moving forward in terms of dealing with any sums of money that have to be given to government. But joining me in the studio, we have Isaac Kofi Ajay. He is with our research desk, our statistical and research desk, if I may, and he joins us to give us further scoop on this matter. Kofi, it's been a while since you joined me here.
Yeah.
You've been out and about.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
And this is our future, should I say it on air?
No.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it there. But tell us, what is the tail of the tape? What is all of this going on with the central bank? And this latest research by Mr. Chiahene and his group, what really does it reveal?
So the research paper looked into Bank of Ghana's, over 60 billion loss that it posted this year. It looks as if this is somewhat unprecedented. You have your central bank posting a loss of about 60 billion. But per some of the literature that they reviewed, if you look at the DDEP done in other countries, it looks as if this is something that every bank, central bank, suffers when they do a domestic debt restructuring. This is simply because the whole restructuring is in the domestic space. Usually the central bank is somewhat used as the guinea pig to write off or to truncate some of the ballooning debts of the government. So, Ben, I hope you remember that when we started this whole debt exchange program, the talks, government wanted to restructure more than 130 billion Ghana cedis. But based on certain, revisions that they did, the targeted amount that government really wanted to restructure was somewhere around 90 billion cedis. So this research paper looked at what Bank of Ghana is reported in their, 2022 report and analyzed some of the things that they said about their own books and then also made some recommendations and projections. So we restructured 80 billion Ghana cedis. And that's why we deemed the domestic debt exchange program as successful.
Right.
And if you do...
Because we weren't looking at 100%.
Exactly. We weren't looking at that huge, percentage. If you do the analysis, it simply tells you that Bank of Ghana contributed more than 60% of these amount that was restructured. So it was Bank of Ghana, commercial banks, securities and exchange, companies, individual bondholders, pension funds, and so many other entities that participated in this domestic debt exchange program. But Bank of Ghana's own is a bit different because, remember, we've been talking about haircuts, and the president was very categorical that there will be no haircuts. But it looks as if Bank of Ghana did not get only haircuts on principals per this research, but got haircuts on both principal and then also on interest.
Right.
So on principal, for instance, Bank of Ghana had non-marketable instruments. It took a haircut of almost 32.3 billion Ghana cedis.
Exactly.
Marketable instruments, haircut was 16.1 billion Ghana cedis. Cocoa board, haircut was 4.7 billion Ghana cedis. Price and exchange rate valuations, some of these things will occur, 5.2 billion. Interest expenses on cost of monetary policy was around 3.1 billion, Ghana cedis. If you add all of these, haircuts and then also exchange variations, you realize that if you do the math, it's somewhere around 60.6.
A little over 60 billion.
Exactly. And that's equivalent to the amount that Bank of Ghana, recorded as a loss in 2022. So we asked a very simple question. You are, anticipating an inflow of about $3 billion from the IMF. And here lies the case, your central bank is posting a loss of about, $6 billion as a result of a DDEP that you did. So if
that's
you
twice what you're looking
exactly,
for in terms of aid.
In terms of aid. So Bank of Ghana, IMF giving you $3 billion, but already because of some of these conditions that you had to meet to get this $3 billion, you ended up constraining your central bank to post a loss of $6 billion that we're talking about here. So currently, that's what the research paper looked at, and is saying that going forward, because of this huge loss, the central bank will have difficulties in performing some of its mandates or responsibility, one of which is the moral suasion, whipping all commercial banks to toe a certain line. And already, because of the DDEP, Bank of Ghana has reduced so many of their requirements that they request from these commercial banks. So commercial banks are now keeping less money with the Bank of Ghana because they need more liquidity to loan out. They've lost most of them have lost their capital.
What's that? The 400 million Ghana cedi requirement, yes, and all of that.
Exactly.
All of those have been massaged, yes, to ensure that the banks can stay afloat.
Absolutely. And if you do that, it means that the inflows going to the central bank will be truncated. And then also the central bank will not have that financial or fiscal muscle to do certain things that they do, especially with monetary policy tightening, because you yourself, you are in a situation that you are battling a loss of about 60 billion. You are only hoping that the economy will recover so that these things will just fade into the system, and then that is it. But if it, we wait and these things are not happening, it simply tells you that this money that's already in the system, which some believe, actually contributed a lot to the over 44% inflation that we have. It's all because of this huge expenditure. So what happened here is that Bank of Ghana gave an amount of $60 billion to the bank, the government.
I mean 60 billion cedis.
Anticipating that they use this money, pay back, and sometimes pay with interest.
Right.
Remember when COVID came, Bank of Ghana had to do COVID-19 bonds, raised about 10 billion Ghana cedis for government to spend. All these monies have been restructured. So simply put, the government went for monies from central bank, could not pay, and now this money is on the books of Bank of Ghana and being recorded as loss. And they are just anticipating that the economy will get better, so it fades into the system, and they do not,
I read something recently, I've forgotten exactly, but the central bank's governor was saying something about no longer giving money to government, but rather taking, yes, care of its own liquidity challenges. And there's also the debate. I'd like to find out, was it just the Bank of Ghana, only the Bank of Ghana, that took a haircut on its principal?
Yes. So what we have right now is only the Bank of Ghana that suffered a double whammy. So they took haircuts on principal
and interest.
Right. But with other, creditors, they had their instruments restructured. So maybe instead of you getting your money in 5 years, 2 years, we give you a long maturity period, and also, you suffer a haircut on your interest. The coupon rates on average was around 18 and 19, but the revised one we have between 5 to 10, and all of these things are haircuts. So it was only the Bank of Ghana that suffered a huge haircut on both principal and interest. You're talking about the 0% financing, where Bank of Ghana has been put into this box where it can no longer finance government activities. So remember when government needed money during COVID, Bank of Ghana came in to issue bonds and gave it to government. This time around, it's not going to be the same. Government is supposed to spend within its means. Bank of Ghana is supposed to also stay within its means and not just come out to finance government expenditure in a way that they did in 2022. So Bank of Ghana, in simple terms, was used as the shock absorber in the DDEP that government, just carried out. And we know that what looks like the second round of the DDEP is underway, where independent power producers, cocoa bills,
dollar-denominated bonds,
exactly, pension funds, all of these were excluded from the first exchange. All of them have been asked to come back to the negotiation table for fresh stocks and then also for further restructuring. So we are just hoping that government will restructure or rework an additional almost 13 billion Ghana cedis, in addition to what they already had somewhere in February 2023.
Just to find out, how precarious is this situation? Because, of course, like you've mentioned, if you do the math, the 60.8 billion Ghana cedis, it's just hovering around $6 billion. We're taking $3 billion from the IMF, and even that is coming in tranches. Okay? $900 million this year, among others. How precarious a situation is this for us from where you sit, vis-a-vis the finance minister saying we've turned the corner? I mean, what does this mean? And what does it mean for our central bank? Right before I go to Professor Lord Mensah, because then again, we're talking about the fact that this is where we find ourselves as a country. But our central bank, comparatively, you mentioned that other countries had also done their DDEPs. Did we take a much steeper hit as far as our central bank is concerned?
Yeah, of course.
Compared to other countries?
Yes. So if you've restructured about 80 billion, in your central bank alone took a haircut almost 61 billion, Ghana cedis, and it tells you
that's a lot.
That's a lot. They took,
I mean, let's do the math. That will be what? So let's say 60 divided by 80
times
100.
That's more.
That gives you 75%.
75%
of the burden on the central bank.
On the central bank, and because of this, in fact, the IMF saw all of these things, and that's why they instituted the 0% financing. It's not bad that the central bank finance, government expenditure, but when you do it in a certain way that has the tendency to affect inflation, monetary policy rates, and all of those things, that's when it becomes problematic. So because of this, the central bank has been constrained to be in a certain fiscal box. And when government is in trouble, it means that the central bank can no longer come in to do some of these things. Remember, the central bank is also, like an entity.
Yeah.
They're supposed to engage in certain things that will bring profits and all of those things. So they posting a loss of about 60 billion tells you that, in this case, they're supposed to be the lender of last resort for commercial banks. Right. And if the lender of last resort is making a loss close to $6 billion, then how does it, sponsor or take care of commercial banks who may have difficulties and all of that?
It means literally it's going to have to neglect some of those responsibilities. And interestingly, if you look at what the governor, among others, and the deputies of the Bank of Ghana are telling us, without this DDEP, their losses would have been far less.
Yes.
In fact, far less than 10 billion Ghana cedis. So it tells you what hole this DDEP has dug the central bank
Exactly. Into. It's a very big hole, that the central bank, it will take a long time for it to come out of this hole. Because already the central bank technically is being asked to save itself, save government, save individuals, save commercial banks and other, institutions. How do they do that when they themselves already have this, huge loss on their books? And in fact, they are supposed to supervise what they call the recapitalization of banks. They themselves, they need
recapitalization. They need capital.
Yeah.
Just stay with me briefly. Let me bring in Professor Lord Mensah and find out what his take is on this latest report. Prof, a very good morning to you, sir.
If you can hear me, good morning to our viewers too.
Right. I don't know whether you've seen the latest research piece put together by Richard Etuahene together with some others. But with what we've been discussing, I also don't know whether you follow the conversation, but the Bank of Ghana, the central bank, took a hit on behalf of government as far as the DDEP is concerned, a 60.8 billion Ghana cedi hit. If you look at the principal component of that, just about 32 billion Ghana cedis, just for the principal. And they also took a hit on their interest. Interestingly, they are the only entity that took a hit as far as the principal is concerned. What do you make of how we've handled Ghana's DDEP vis-a-vis what we've seen in other countries? The exposure was not this much in other countries. If you do the math for Ghana, it means that with the 60.8 billion Ghana cedis that the central bank had to take as a loss, it means they contributed 75%. They took a hit on behalf of government. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so if you look at the government debt portfolio, I mean, clearly, central bank was part of the portfolio. And we are looking at a situation where I would say for political reasons, because government couldn't gather the confidence, to go all out as far as the DDEP is concerned. And then before the DDEP, the economic, dip we find ourselves in, if government should, strike, the DDEP in such a way that it puts much burden on Ghanaians, it would have been tough, situation. So government found it easier, to deal with the Bank of Ghana rather than coming to the pensions and other things that individuals, hold up investment in them. So looking at the central bank and then, creditor of, one entity, it became difficult. It became easier for the government to deal with the central bank rather than, negotiating with the banks who are diversified in terms of their credit to the government, dealing with the pensions, who are also managing assets for those, workers and, all sorts of investors in that manner. So government saw it easier to deal with a central bank. And, as a central bank, you are running a balance sheet, which comes with liabilities and then, assets. So central bank investing in, government instrument, giving a loan to government was more or less like an asset they were holding. So for government not to be able to pay them, then it means their asset became impaired. And that is why, they're running at a loss. So from where I sit, I think the government found it easier to deal with a central bank rather than, doing a DDEP that will cover all its creditors locally.
But when you say that the government found it easier to deal with the central bank, does that mean government felt it was apt to go for the low-hanging fruit, and were the consequences worth it?
Yeah, sure. Because if you look at it carefully, Ghanaians were not used to the bond haircut, and it was even a new term to the investor community. How many people understood what the haircut means and what the debt estimate?
Well, we have a bit of a connectivity problem to Professor Lord Mensah. Let me try one more time to see whether we can get him. Prof, is the connection any better now? It doesn't appear it is. We'll try to get Prof back. But like I was mentioning to him, Kofi, indeed, it would appear then that government decided to go for low-hanging fruit, the easiest possible mechanism in terms of executing this DDEP. And that, of course, would be the central bank. But with the hit that it had to take, 50% of a haircut on its principal alone, that is a lot.
Yeah, so the IMF, they have a very simple description of the whole exchange program or restructuring. They say restructuring is like performing surgery. Yeah. You only do it when it is necessary. Mm-hmm. And when you are doing it, it is easier. You are performing that surgery on someone in your domestic space. Because with that, for instance, the Bank of Ghana, if you are restructuring Bank of Ghana, of all the creditors who were invited to come and exchange their bonds, you saw individual bondholders protesting. We saw pension funds, organized labor against it, IPPs against it, but we never heard Bank of Ghana saying,
right,
we will not be able to participate, because they know they form an integral part of this whole, setup. And so, just like you put it, it was a low-hanging fruit for governments to just go and restructure. Because if you need that space, the person to give you that very quick space will be your own central bank. And they look at the data and they realize that, I mean, this restructuring that we even want to do, and if you look at the people we are, owing, or our creditors, our own central bank has about more than 50% of this amount that we want to restructure. Exactly. So if you just do away with the central bank, we've cleared 50%.
50% of a hurdle is gone.
Exactly. Then we'll now find ways and means to find other creditors and then capture that 30% that we want. And that is one of the reasons why government or the finance ministry felt it was so easy to go and then restructure the Bank of Ghana, their instrument and all of those things. And if you look at the fact that they were the only institution that suffered double haircut, it tells you that there were internal, opposition that, if you want to do, then give us a cushion. Probably from commercial banks or, other entities saying that Bank of Ghana is the one holding most of your assets or most of your bonds. If you restructure us, if you give us double haircut in terms of principal and then also interest, it means that we'll find ourselves in a very tight situation where we have to go back to Bank of Ghana for liquidity. So why don't you tackle Bank of Ghana, for instance, give them the haircut, give us only haircut on interest, so that same Bank of Ghana can come in to give us sort of recapitalization when we are in trouble. So facts, it was a low-hanging fruit. And that's why government decided to block it the way that they did.
In terms of addressing the ongoing, the losses, because now it has taken the hit that it has, and we're looking at another round of debt exchange. I don't know what role is the central bank going to play in all of this in the second round?
So this time around, central bank, they've already restructured.
Because if you look at the cocoa bit, they took a hit initially in the first round.
Yeah.
And now we also know that the cocoa bills are again under scrutiny.
I think the first one was cocoa board. The second one is cocoa bills. So cocoa bills usually are the foreign inflows we have to just buy cocoa here in Ghana. And most of the times, that is what the governments use as a buffer or, as something to show up the budget when we find ourselves in a very tight situation. So remember in 2022, we're kicked out of the international fund market. We lost access, let me put it that way. And the average $3 billion we're getting every year, $3 billion that we're getting every year to show up our budget, we're not getting it. And it was the cocoa bills plus other loans, the 75 million that came in and all of those things that saved the country. And already, foreign investors who came to this country to buy bonds with their own monies in terms of dollars have also been restructured. So it means that the government is telling all creditors that nobody is being excluded this time around. The only people probably who have 100% exemption is treasury bills. But mind you that even in the exchange memorandum, government says this is the initial exchange. It probably tells you that there's going to be a time that governments will call for other exchange. The finance minister mentioned it again.
When you say call for other exchange, what are you hinting at?
Exactly. So remember pension funds, IPPs, cocoa bills, all of them were given 100% exemption.
Right.
Government gave them that assurance, 100% hooray. But
and in some cases, they had to fight for it.
Exactly. After the first restructuring, which the success rate was 80%, now you have that same government coming to these creditors and saying, come back. We gave you exemption, but this time around, we are calling for a new exchange. Come. The new exchange is new exchange because they probably may have different terms compared to the
earlier
first
one.
one that we did. So this is a new exchange. And all of these people have access to, tell government their terms and all of those things. There possibly will be another exchange where other creditors will be asked to come back. And I don't know if the further exchanges or the subsequent ones will include a Bank of Ghana will also be called to come back to the negotiation table. I do not know. But what I know is that there was an initial domestic debt exchange program that was deemed successful at 80%. The finance minister is now calling on other creditors to come for another exchange. It's a second round. They call it alternative debt restructuring, but I choose to call it second round because you already closed the first one. And so if you are doing another, then it tells you that this is the second round.
And we do not know just how painful this second round is going to be because already the sector has been squeezed into a corner, and the few that have been left out, so to speak, are also going to suffer these shocks, which could mean that the impact on the economy could lead to further strain on pockets. But before I come back to you, and I'd like us to do a bit of a comparative study. I mean, we've seen what happened per Dr. Tiahane's report. We've seen what has happened in the Czech Republic, in Hungary, in Brazil, in Chile. I want you to look at some of those dynamics from the 1990s versus what we're doing now, and let's see what the comparatives are from there. But let me come to Professor Mensah. You were making the point about the low-hanging fruit and maybe what the consequences thereof are. Please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, it's about them the consequence. I mean, we're looking at the situation where you want to do debt restructuring. At the end of the day, your investor community don't really understand what it takes to get a debt, structured. And then also remember we're, handling the debt exchange on time because we needed, the IMF program within the shortest possible time when we're going through the first restructuring. And so looking at the creditor composition, obviously the central bank is going to be, one of the major creditors that is supposed to take a cut because government was finding it difficult to convince the investor community, the essence of, the debt restructuring. And that is why possibly, the central bank had to come in to absorb the kind of shocks that is expected. Because if you look at, debt restructuring and you are running it across the creditor space, then obviously your, target of a debt to be structured should have been spread across all the creditors. But here is the case, some of the creditors were not interested in, the debt restructuring. So government had no choice than to go to the central bank to take up, that big haircut.
And in terms of the cost of this, because like we've been deliberating upon in the studio, we have gone to the IMF for $3 billion, a kitty that will come over time. This year we're getting 900 million, 600 million already in the bag, 300 million at the latter part of the year, sometime in September, thereabouts. But the debt overhang for the central bank alone is twice as much, $6 billion. I mean, if you look at the 60.8 billion Ghana cedis and you just use 10 cedis to the dollar, you're getting $6 billion. What is going to be the impact of this in terms of the central bank, its own activities within the banking sector, and even the regulation of the banks? Because now it has had to massage some of the regulations just so the banks can stay afloat. What does this really imply?
Yeah, I mean, the impact is so huge. And there is that kind of, we have economic impact, and then we also have, psychological impact. The central bank that is supposed to be a lender of last resort, it seems to be, taking a loss on its balance sheet. Obviously, it tells you that in a situation where a bank is getting impaired, a central bank which is supposed to come for a rescue may not be in a good position to take up, that rescue. Another thing.
Are you suggesting the central bank, the rescuer, needs rescuing? Is that what you're saying?
Of course, that's how it is. Because when it turns up that your balance sheet is being impaired, and you are supposed to be the rescuer for the banks in case they fall in trouble, it will be difficult for the central bank to play that role as we speak now. But I know over time things are going to work out well because taking a loss, it's one of the economic hits, and usually what happens is that per the executive power, sometimes the government can trigger the central bank to come in for its rescue. But that central bank is no more. We don't have it anymore. And then another thing we may have to look at is, the trust that is built between the central bank and the external agencies. That trust is gone. And that is why, if you look into the IMF program, we are being forced to do zero financing, from the central bank. The government is supposed to do zero financing. And the normal circumstance, the central bank is supposed to always come in to, hold up the government financing between usually from January to March. That is when we are about to run up, the fiscal year before, the tax inflows start trickling in, for that particular year. So that financing gap is always needed from the central bank. But here is the case, because of what happened, we are being forced to do zero financing. It used to be somewhere, 5%. Now, what is happening on the ground seems to give me a sense of direction. And the sense of direction, looking at how we took out, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, right? That was limiting the central bank's lending to the government. And then we took it out and we never, replaced it. Because I was expecting that, during the COVID, which in the act, it gives room for the government to ask for a step aside of the act. And once we come out from the situation, the act comes back. But as we speak now, the finance minister has not gone to parliament to restore the act. And so that gave the finance minister, room to borrow from the central bank, unnecessarily. And so from where I sit,
it's unfortunate we appear to be losing Professor Mensah one more time. We'll try to reconnect with him so he can make those crucial points he was about to make. But, Kofi, so I was talking about the comparative, and I also want us to look at the reasons cited by this research piece in terms of why the central bank incurred those losses. But per what you know, comparatively at least, just basic comparison between what other entities have done in the past and what we are doing now, are there any linkages? Have we overshot it as far as our central bank is concerned?
Well, so there's a clear, variation between...
Disparity.
Yeah, what they did and what we did. To the extent that we handle this whole situation as a unilateral, decision. So you see the finance ministry bringing out measures, bringing out MOUs, memorandum of understanding, and all of those things, and says, take it. In some cases, it's a take it or leave it. You get it. But with
and in this instance, just to add, in recent times, is it Dr. Amin Adam? Yeah. We've heard from him as well, as far as the IPP situation is concerned, saying that if you don't take this, then you might as well forfeit everything. So it appears we're continuing on that trajectory.
Absolutely. So if you look at all these countries that the research paper listed, all of these countries, especially Jamaica, all of them made sure that the whole debt restructuring talks were bilateral. So whoever you are dealing with, you have to know that there's a difference between a commercial bank and an insurance company. There's also a difference between an insurance company and an individual who just bought bonds. Yeah. An individual who just bought bonds can be a pensioner, he or she has his money in a pension fund, also has personal money that he or she has used to buy bonds. So you have to do all of these comparative analysis. And to the extent that going into this whole debt exchange program, it looks as if Bank of Ghana did not do due diligence.
The Bank of Ghana, it appears, did not do due diligence.
In terms of the magnitude of the hit that we're going to have as a country. Because if you do all of these calculations, you realize, just like the IMF said, it's like a surgery. You only do it when it is necessary. It means you may have done your cost-benefit analysis, and you know that going into this, there's a number of years that I will heal. This is the money that I'm going to get. But we only looked at this whole debt exchange program as just a condition to get 3 billion. Because we're in a very difficult situation where we needed foreign exchange. So
and now we find ourselves in a $6 billion
Exactly.
hole. And the question is, did we go or did we come?
Exactly.
And how do we get out of this?
So if we had done all of these cost-benefit analysis that other countries did, because if you compare, for instance, Brazil in 1997, the loss that they made, the central bank made during that time is way lower than you can say maybe exchange rate differentiation, all of those things. But if you do, how do you call it, covariance analysis, you realize that it's very, low in terms of what Brazil.
Insignificant, a drop in the bucket compared to ours. Just hold for me. We have Professor Mensah back on the line, back connecting with us. Prof, so, I mean, you were making a point and that got truncated, but the issue has arisen. I just posed that question to my colleague here, Isaac Kofi, on whether due diligence had been done, sufficient due diligence from the central bank's standpoint. He doesn't think so. What do you think? Because if we look at the losses comparatively, compared to other countries in the 90s, Brazil, Chile, and then other countries down the road, I mean, from Germany to Korea to even the United States and the rest, this is humongous, to say the least. What's your take?
We are comparing, debt issues across countries. We may have to be careful because at the time we were going into the debt restructuring, what was our debt to GDP ratio? I mean, compared to those countries that we are relating, the economic loss as far as the DDEP is concerned to. So I believe that the due diligence, as we're talking about, whatever the case may be, if the country is in trouble, obviously everything must fall on the central bank.
Yes, I get that point, but even then, some level of responsibility must be attached to it, because like we're pointing out, if you are getting funding for a $3 billion gap, and you are creating a $6 billion debt. I mean, that's like a Pyrrhic victory. Ordinarily, it means it doesn't make any sense, does it?
Yes, I mean, of course, once you are going into through an economic decision, you may have to look at the benefits that you intend to reap, and then you look at the cost. Now, the benefit, we may not take it as one-off, which we're going to get $3 billion. The $3 billion has some externalities that comes with it. In terms of finance, yes, we are getting $3 billion. What about, getting the $3 billion and then, having the economy being stabilized and then economic activities flowing? That should go a long way to exceed the $6 billion that we are looking at. So I'm really careful to look at it from the one-off situation because, I mean, it is an economic decision. There is a financial, benefit, but there is also externalities that comes with that $3 billion. Those externalities could be having a stable economy and then the possible inflows that you get from the, stable economy. Let's look at it on the counter side. If we were not to, go by the debt restructuring, what would have happened to this country? The economy would have crunched. The economy would have, drained down completely. Everything would have been frozen. And then, we look at the impact relative to the $6 billion. So from where I sit, if you look at it one-off, you'll be tempted to say that, yes, indeed, we're getting $3 billion and then we are losing, $6 billion. But let's look at, the economic externalities that will come, after we got the IMF program and then the conditionalities that goes with it. With the IMF program, it's going to limit the government in terms of its borrowing. As a result of that, reduction in interest rate is likely to, come up going forward. With the IMF program, financial discipline is going to be restored for the next 3 years. These are all things that have a tendency of making good impact on the economy. Remember, the Ghanaian economy is always in such a way that anytime we find it with ourselves with IMF, that is when we see good economic indicators.
But how does all of this impact our debt stock, which on the back of the DDEP and the central bank's losses have now hit close to 600 billion Ghana cedis? Yes, we are making some gains, but then how much more are we losing?
Yeah, so you had a central bank waiving off, some debt as far as government's, credit is concerned. And so, yes, we've taken up a hit. And as a result of that, that international credibility, as far as our central bank is concerned, has been compromised one way or the other. So now, if any country is dealing with, the Ghanaian central bank, they're going to be careful, one way or the other, as far as, the creditor space is concerned. If you're going to rank, central bank and give them credit rating, I can tell you that our central bank is going to get a very low, credit rating. Not just because, the Ghanaian economy is not doing well, but for the purpose of taking that decision of printing money to the government, to that, to that tune. And so, obviously, I mean, it's bound that, the central bank, has lost that credibility.
So the central bank has lost that credibility, and you see that when central banks, are rated, and of course that also impacts the banks themselves within the country, the rating is going to be pretty low. But that begs the questions then, and I'm going to put three of them together. How sticky is the situation we find ourselves in? How does the Bank of Ghana extricate itself from this quagmire, the mud it finds itself in? How long will it take?
You see, Bank of Ghana, let me tell you one thing. We dub the Bank of Ghana as an independent, body, which is supposed to make sure that we have financial stability in our economy and also control prices. But then we have to, look at the independence in two ways. When it comes to the governance independence, Bank of Ghana never had that governance independence. And that was a very risky thing that we're treading on as a country. Bank of Ghana had, one way or the other, operational independence. And that has even been compromised because of the printing of money to the government in the current situation we find ourselves in. The governance independence has been compromised because of our constitution. The constitution mandates the president to appoint the governor, which one way or the other, the kind of relationship the president and then the governor may have can influence decisions. And that is exactly what has happened to, the situation they find themselves in now. So Bank of Ghana, the kind of independence, which is operational independence that they were enjoying, has been compromised. And I believe that, going forward, any governor that is going to be appointed, the governor must state it clear to the president that he should allow him to do his job, rather than interfering one way or the other. So I think it has to do with, the structure of our financial system, all the way from the way we appoint the central bank governor and then the operations of the Bank of Ghana. If you go to the Bank of Ghana's board as we speak now, government, membership constitutes about three of them, and which, they will have influence, and including the governor himself, who is the chairman of that board. So I think, it has to do with the structure that we have. And like you're asking me how sticky it is, if we don't take care and we don't restructure the way and manner the Bank of Ghana operates, it will go a long way to have problems. And, it's clearly, stated in the literature. Any country that the central bank's independence is compromised, there's no way that country, is able to control inflation and then build up into interest rate, structures.
Before I move on to Dr. Etiahene, just a quick one, because we look at the report that has been provided. We look at the three core dynamics that led to where the Bank of Ghana finds itself. One, it states market securities valued at 16.1 billion Ghana cedis held by the central bank sold at an inferior value, okay? So they were sold for less than the cost at which they were procured. Then second, losses occurred because of the 50% haircut of non-market debt of 64.5 billion Ghana cedis. We've already spoken about that. And third, there was a revaluation of foreign exchange holdings, that is the domestic currency devalued against reserve currencies. This also likely leading to a loss. Are you in agreement with these three core areas or thematic areas? And do you feel they were handled properly in the DDEP? Quick reaction to that.
It has to do with, the Bank of Ghana's balance sheet. If you look at the balance sheet clearly, those things that you mentioned, they all form part of the asset. And once you value and then you more or less put up, your asset on the market below market value, I mean, there's no way you can make up, your liabilities. And so clearly, I do agree with that. It's purely, balance sheet situation. Foreign exchange, issues, a possibility of taking up, liabilities that you are not getting asset to match up with it. And so clearly, it has to do with operations of the Bank of Ghana. And I do side with the 3 points that has been raised in the report.
The hold for me, Prof. Let me bring in Dr. Richmond Etuahine. He's a banking consultant. He's one of those behind this latest research. Doc, good morning.
Good morning, Ben. How are you, sir?
I am okay. I'm hanging in there. I hope you're well.
I'm also hanging in as you're hanging in.
Okay, then it's a lot of hanging that we're going to be doing. If you're hanging and I'm hanging, I don't know, Kofi AJ, are you hanging?
I'm very much so hanging.
Yeah, very much. Anyway, let's get into the detail because guess what? The central bank is also hanging per the latest report that you've put out there. But comparatively, we've been looking at different central banks and what they've done in the past in their own debt exchange programs vis-a-vis what we have done. Our risk, the exposure of the Bank of Ghana, 75%. Was that apt? Did we overshoot it? Have we put the central bank in a very negative position?
Well, in the view of the correspondent banks and the other partners, we have put them in a not very pleasant position at all. It doesn't look very good in the eyes of those they deal with, like the Fed and the Bank of England and the Bundesbank and the Swiss and the France. I mean, it's not good in the face of them. But from our perspective, the word they use is policy solvency. From us, is okay because you're speaking to us. We are not part of the central banking system. So from the policy stance, from Ghana's point of view, there is nothing wrong about what has happened.
But if you look at the dynamic that we've been speaking of, what the loss is in dollar terms compared to what we are getting from the IMF, we did all of this partly or largely to secure an IMF program. Now, it has left us with a $6 billion debt overhang, if you look at the 60.8 billion Ghana cedis that we're looking at. What does that do then to the central bank comparatively? 3 billion for 6 billion. That leaves us still with a loss of another 3 billion.
Thank you, Ben. I think this is the question that each and every one, those of us who do a lot of research, think that if we had done our stress testing or scenario testing, this thing would have come out clear at the beginning and we would have known the consequences. If you do the stress testing and you put the various variables in the model, it tells you that you're going to destroy yourself by 6 billion. You're going to get only 3 billion. That is not even the whole story. If you look at the banking sector, that one was 41.3 billion cedis. If you also convert that one, if you add the two, you're talking close to 10 billion. And if you go for 3 billion, are you really doing some justice to yourself? So the question that comes in to me, and those of us who have been looking at it, is that did we do our homework very well? Because the way we move quickly with these things, I think it was too much. It was not. It was coercive instead of people trying to understand what the finance minister was doing. Unfortunately, we all allow it to happen, and then now the consequences that we have. We have consequences on the central bank. We have consequences on the banking sector, and it's not very pleasant at all because the regulator who is supposed to regulate is also coming under pressure. So how is he going to regulate? So for me, it all started when the DDEP started, and they're talking of going for loans from IMF support. I think what we should have done, which when you say they have done, is that what scenario test did they do? What stress testing? And I want them to come out to tell us this is what we did. And this is because then, when it started in November, myself and Evans Mensah, I came out with stress testing and scenario to tell that if you do this, it will happen. If you do that, I have the word there. But when you say it, then they were thinking that I was a joker. But you see, I took my time, used a model to produce my results to challenge where we were going. But nobody listened to me.
And now, in a way, you've been proven right. So your suspicion then is that the central bank did not do the correct stress testing to see where we could end up in all of this, because you cannot embark on a DDEP without having gone through that system. Or likely, due diligence wasn't done. Or maybe, Doc, all these were done, but we still went ahead willy-nilly because of a certain picture we wanted to portray. What do you think?
Well, your last statement could be right. We wanted to portray a certain statement, so we wouldn't even think about the consequences and the implications. So that is where we find ourselves, because originally when they said we didn't want a haircut, I remember the statement was made categorically that Ghana is not going to face a haircut. But you see, when you talk about haircut, it depends upon what you mean by haircut. Even with the DDEP, it is a haircut because you have reduced the value of people's investments. So that is a haircut. But the word haircut, if you use the word haircut, people thought it was too harsh. But if you do your haircut with 20%, as I did with 20-30%, we would have been in a better position than we have somebody has done for 50% haircut. So, Ben, I would always say that we need to always use the data and science. I like the people who say data and science, data and figures, so that we can always predict, so that when it comes to hit us, then we are not shocked or we are not worried. And also, we must be transparent. Another one is transparency. Transparency, getting people to understand what you're doing. Don't put it in a mystery form that as if you are the only person who understands. That is the problem that we have. People think that when they do it, other people cannot say it. Let me even chip in this thing. People talk about non-marketable. What is non-marketable? I was explaining in one of your sister stations. It is government accommodation, which is what we call government accommodation finance, whereby the Bank of Ghana financed the government to 64.5 billion, 64.6 billion. And people who use English, they say non-marketable market. The non-marketable is the government finance. The marketable is the bond, which was only 16.1 billion. You see? So if you use the word that everything has been haircut by that and this, I find it quite incredible. So that is where I'm saying let's work with transparency and let us work with objectivity and objectivity based on figure, science, and data. If we do this, we're not going to have these challenges as we are experiencing in our bank.
Now, some have dismissed these losses by the Bank of Ghana. Others have said that, look, if we don't take care, it could weaken the very independence of our central bank. So, do these losses really matter in the short, medium, and long term? What could be the impact?
Well, it depends on which angle you're speaking from. People were saying that they have cited, as I've cited, about 7 countries or 8 countries. They were able to continue with the central bank. But you see, if you're talking about Bank of England, and you're talking about Fed, even Fed, if Fed is holding a negative capital, it is not a big news. Because they can prove to you that during the quantitative easing, we supported the economy so much, and the economy has turned around. And look at the American economy. It has turned around so much that inflation is one of the lowest in the whole world at the moment. Even England, inflation is no more than 6%. So they're all getting their things right. But if you say you have done this and the inflation is running, you have supported the economy and inflation is running at 42.5%, I begin to worry about what things they say. Now, the main question is that on the eyes of we Ghanaians, you can say policy stand. We are strong to do it, yes. But how do people say it? And again, if it's not well managed, if you look at the World IMF country, 23.168, it says that after the debt exchange, the central bank would have to go to the government for recapitalization. And what is that? What does that mean? It means that the already dwindled public finances, which is at its lowest ebb, would also have to be hit. And that will have a consequences on the debt GDP ratio, which we are all trying to bring it down. So it has a lot of ramification. When people say that, what they say that it has nothing to do. I'm telling you, if you're going to seek 6 billion from the government, where is the government going to get that money from?
Right.
It's only going to compound the debt GDP ratio, and that will not allow us to achieve the target we set for ourselves for 2027. So those who are saying that, they should also look at the physical side, and then let us look at the monetary side. If government is going to finance it, what is going to happen is that your independence can be threatened. Your independence can be threatened. Operational independence and financial independence are key components in central bank management. So if you falter one way, and then you're not going to do what you're doing. The only thing we have gotten now is that the IMF is telling us that you're doing zero financing. So I don't know where the government will get the money to support them medium to long term to recapitalize without hurting the physical pressure that we have now, Ben.
I have a few questions I'm going to throw at both of you, Professor Mensah and Dr. Etiahene, as we cap off the conversation. You can pick and choose which ones to respond to. There are those who have said, and I believe in recent times, I forget which person, whether it was Kwame Pianim or I've just forgotten, who made mention of the fact that the Bretton Woods institutions, they are more like neo-colonialist in their mindset, and that they do more harm than good to these countries that oftentimes in the developing world would go to them for programs like we're seeing now. That is the first bit. The second bit has to do with this question or this comment that comes through from Sharif Bawa Isa. He says, good morning, Ben. I am enjoying your show, listening to your panel carefully. You can see we allowed the politicians to play with us. I think we need to look at our constitution again. The government of the day cannot appoint everybody. That was a point that Professor Mensah made. The central bank's governor and all of that, often appointed by Mr. President or Madam President, though we've never had that. How do you relate to that point moving forward? What do we have to do? Because once this person is appointed by the president, that person would be naturally beholden in a way to the appointing authority. And any final thoughts you could add to that? I'll start with you, Professor Mensah.
Yeah, clearly with the Bretton Woods institutions, I beg to differ on the statement that they do more harm than, the good they're supposed to have for us. I think, the Bretton Woods institution serves as, more or less, an insurance. Let me put it that way. And for insurance, until you find yourself in a problem, your relationship with them, will not be triggered. And I believe that our economic managers, having known that we have a relationship with, the various Bretton Woods institutions, tend to, intentionally run down, the economy and then go for a claim. Let me put it that way. Because if you have an insurance and you run your car into a ditch or you run your car into someone's car, especially if it's comprehensive, obviously you get, your car back or your car is restored to its shape. So I think with that at the hindsight of our economic managers, it has pampered them so much that they tend to, run the economy on their way and manner they want it. And when we find ourselves into trouble, they go back to these Bretton Woods institutions. But apart from that, I can say that the relationship we have with them is only triggered when we misbehave, when we don't manage the economy well. So I differ on that. If we are able to sit down and then manage the economies very well, I think we'll get a respect from this Bretton.
I think Prof's connection has frozen again. Dr. Etuahene, over to you. There's something I wanted to add, and maybe just your expectations on the second round of domestic debt exchange, or the debt exchange, I should put it that way, which will involve the dollar-denominated bonds, the IPPs, cocoa bills, among others. You could add that if you care to. Dr. Etuahene.
Thank you very much, Ben. I think Dr. Ismail
Professor Mens?
Yes, Dr. Ismail
Yes. It was Dr. Ishmael Yamson, yes.
I follow him, and I think the statement he made, to that extent, to me, I agree to some points that he said. And I also agree with Professor Mensah a lot, that what he's saying is right. You see, the problem with these IMF is that, that's why I agree with Dr. Yamson. We see, they sit down and let the guys run down the hill, and then they come. I would have thought, be the headmaster. You take the stick and tell them that, mother, don't do this. If you do it, we will help you. At least it will send a signal to them that they cannot manage the economy. And because of your relationship, you always go for support. And we've been there for 70. Who knows, we won't go for 20 times. Because they will leave them to destroy it, and then they will go and beg, and they will come. So I agree with both Professor Mensah and Dr. Ishmael Yamson that they should come out. They shouldn't wait for us to go down. And again, to the governance, the governance is what Professor Lord Mensah is saying. You see, the law has been made in such a way that somebody appoints everybody. So they work to the best. That is where the governance issue comes in. And I think as we look at the constitution, we may have to look at these things very well to help us for future development. And for the debt, DDEP on cocoa and the IPPs, and it's going to hit some of the financial sector, to hit some of them. And if it hits them, we are also going to run down the system. The dollar-denominated bonds, I read some of the banks are in, and that one too would affect institutions. So it is not good at all. The situation we are finding ourselves now, whether we're going to restructure the IPs and all those things, are going to affect the balance sheet of most of the businesses in this country. And that would have a big effect on the economic recovery, the so-called turnaround that people say they have turned around.
You say the so-called turnaround that people say they've turned around. You're referring to the finance minister. Just to conclude, just give me a figure. On a scale of 1 to 10, looking at the DDEP, part 1 and part 2 that is expected, how much of a shock do you think, how much pain do you think we're going to feel throughout the rest of this year and in the coming year, on a scale of 1 to 10? What would you say? I
will give it a 3.
A 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give it 3.
So 30% more pain?
Yeah. 30% more pain will come in, but it will not be as huge as we have had from the previous one. There will be a pain. There will definitely be a pain.
Thank you so much, Dr. Etuahene, for sharing your insights on this matter. So basically, he says, yes, maybe I should have asked him as well what percentage he would have given in terms of the pain of the first DDEP. But he says, whatever pain we may have felt, we should look forward to another 30% add-on if this second round comes off, which is very likely. But what would be your concluding thoughts? And maybe what do you think about Dr. Ishmael Yamson's assertions when it comes to the Bretton Woods institutions?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that Ghana was in the ICU as a patient that had lost both of its kidneys and needed.
Wow, so basically you're dying.
Yes, Ghana was dying. And the only donor that came in to give a kidney probably was the Bank of Ghana, because they felt they had 2 kidneys, both were in a very good situation, so why don't we give the government 1? They gave the government 1. Now they are being told that your last kidney that you have has issues. So
that's the central bank?
Yes, so who is going to be a donor to the central bank?
Wow, that's an interesting scenario.
It's simple thing, that's what is going on. So Ghana had a problem. Central bank came to help, and now the central bank finds itself in a very precarious situation where it is being asked to save itself, save government again, save
the banks,
institutions, and individual bondholders. For the Bretton Woods institutions, they never force anything on anybody. You only go there when you do your own things and it takes you there.
Like they say, you only do some of these things when you require surgery.
Absolutely.
Surgery is when things have really come to
and if you
ahead.
go for an IMF program, it's not by force that you should do a debt restructuring. You only do a debt restructuring when you borrow to a certain point that we find it unsustainable, that they don't want to give you the money so that you go and use that same money to pay debt. So restructure before we give you. So in 2015, when we took our 16th IMF program, our debt level was somewhat sustainable. We didn't have to do any form of debt restructuring. In fact, this is new.
This is the first time
Yes.
we're restructuring.
So it
our debt.
means that there are conditions, all right, that the Bretton Woods institutions will put on you. But if you don't reach a certain level, you will not trigger those conditionalities. So I won't say they bring more harm than good, but I will say that your own doings will trigger some of their conditionalities. And it's as simple as that. They don't force any.
Maybe we ourselves do more harm than good to ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why the IMF will not, they have programs. But if you qualify for an ECF or whatever, they will ask for your own program in your letter of intent. So this program that we are currently running is just an IMF-supported program. The name of the actual program is what government calls the PCPEG.
Yeah.
IMF is just supporting, making sure that you do certain things. So any form of austerity that is in that program, we
Is our own.
Yes, that we say we can solve our problem this way.
Well, those who joined us for this conversation in the studio, Isaac Kofi Ajay, he is with us here at Joy News. Dr. Richmond Etiahene is a banking consultant. We also had Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School on this conversation. The verdict is out there. You read between the lines, but we can expect more pain as far as Dr. Richard Etiahene is concerned. If you felt pain during the first DDEP, this time, according to him, another 30% at least is coming your way. That's how we cap off the conversation. But stay with us because up next, we still have that conversation on SITAG and their sit down, their industrial action. What is the latest on that? What is the way forward? We'll be bringing you details after the break.